Scroll view. Hello everyone. This is the video that we're going to talk about scroll view. So we use scroll view when the components do not all fit on the screen. Scroll view creates a scroll bar so that we can scroll the screen from top to bottom, from left to right. It's very easy to use, so I just want to show you how Android Studio makes it pretty quickly. So I've got a project here, and before I start, I want to show you what it looks like when we finish. So you can see here that there are 8 buttons in the application. They don't all fit on the screen. And there's a scroll bar on the right side of the screen. And the user can scroll top down. And let's see how we can do this. So in the main activity XML file, there's a constraint layout. And I'll delete the constraint layout and write scroll view. Okay, so now I've got scroll view. But scroll view doesn't have a scroll bar right now because when the components don't fit on the screen, it automatically writes in a scroll bar. So the most important thing here is scroll view can have just one child. So that means you cannot add more than one component to it. And because of this, we'll need to add another layout under the scroll view. So I can add other components in the new layout. And for that, I will add a linear layout under scroll view. And then I will add the other components into this linear layout. So I'll add a button in linear layout. I will change width and height of the button to 150 dp. And also I'll change the text of the button to button number 1. And I'll change the gravity of the linear layout to the center. Now that's done. I'll copy this button and paste it 3 times. And now I have 4 buttons. So I'll change the names and IDs because, of course, each ID should be unique. I will run my application in this state. Okay, so you can see here that there is no scroll bar because 4 buttons fit on the screen. So even when we have scroll view, if the components fit on the screen, scroll bar doesn't appear. So let's just add a couple more buttons and run it again. Now we have a scroll bar, and we can scroll the screen from top to bottom. So this is a vertical scroll view. Can we do it horizontally? So first, I'll just change the orientation of the linear layout, and let's make it horizontal. Okay, so now the buttons are shown horizontally on the screen. I will run my application this way, and let's see, it doesn't work, or does it? Let's change the orientation of the linear layout, and you see, no, it's not working. So what do we do? So let's add horizontal scroll between scroll view and linear, and it's width and height can be wrap content. And I'll just put linear layout between these two XML tags. And I'll cut this from here and paste it under linear layout. And let's run it again. There it goes. It's working horizontally now. So you can use scroll view on your application design friendly pages. Until then, I'll see you in the next video. Web view. Hello, everyone. Now we get to the video about web view. So let's have a little chat about it. Web view is used to show internet sites in Android applications. So you can use web view to show an internet site in your application. I'm sure you're very familiar with that, so let's go to Android Studio and see how you build it in practice. So using web view is really very easy. So I have a project here, and I will just add web view to my project. It happens to be under the widget section. So I'll just drag it and drop it under relative layout. Layout width and height of the web view can stay as match parent. And I'll define this web view in the main activity.java file. And I'll just write here web view. And inside the onCreate method, of course, I do need to give an ID to this web view. ID can be web. So web view equals find view by ID r.id.web. And now that's done, I will give a URL to this web view to load the internet site. And I'll just write here webview.load URL and internet address. I want to load Google into this project for now. But if I leave it like this, it will open this site in an external explorer. Okay, so that's why I'm going to need to add this code. Webview.set webviewClient new webviewClient. So now after this code is in, it will open this internet site inside of the application. So let's run it and see. So the application is open, but the website is not loaded. Now, well, that's because if an application wants to connect to the internet within the device, it needs to ask for permission. So you can't connect to an internet site using a person's device without that permission. I think we talked about that before. Why don't you go back and have a look at the permissions video if that doesn't make sense. So where do we get the permission? Let's get it from the manifest file. So I will write in the manifest file, uses permission. And then after that, it shows me the permissions. And one of the permissions is internet. So then I can take the internet connection permission from the user. And the second one is Wi-Fi state. And I'll need to get the user permission to use its Wi-Fi connection. And the user will see these permissions when downloading the application. And of course, say yes. And let's run it again. So again, it's not working. Do you know why? I mean, I know why it's not working, but I just want to show this to you. So after Android 9, yeah, this is the problem that you get. So I'm not going to tell you too many details about this, but you should just know that if you see this error, you need to add this code line into the application section in the manifest file. So I'll write this, you know what, I think I wrote this code before. And then so after that, I can just run my application with all the peace of mind that I can muster. And sure enough, it's working. So now I can connect to Google in my application, and I can basically go to any internet site from here, and I can search for something in here. But when I click the back button, it won't go back. It closes the application. So here's a problem we need to solve. And I can do that in the main activity file. Yeah, so there is a method. Its name is onBackPress method. So this method controls the back button on the device. And I will write in this method if WebView.canGoBack, WebView.goBack. Else, apply backpress method. So let's run it again with that added. Okay, so Google is opened, and I'll write Android to search. Okay, so it searched. And when I press the back button, it goes back to the previous site until the previous site history is finished. And then after it finishes the previous site, it closes the application. So this is basically how we use WebView within Android applications. I hope this is useful for you because you can include it in the applications that you will construct, develop, and deploy. I will see you in the next video. We've got some great stuff in store now that you know some basics. Application lifecycle. Hello, everyone. We're going to talk a little bit about lifecycle in Android applications. So what do I mean when I say lifecycle? So the lifecycle basically starts from the moment we first start to open the application up to the moment the application is opened. Certain operations are carried out and closed. It also includes these two endpoints in the process. And all these phases of the application are called the life cycle. So an application passes through certain phases from the first open until it closes. And all of these phases are what's known as life cycle. Now, life cycle has a very important role in Android application development because when you develop an Android application, you will need to consider these life cycles. So first, let's talk about what these life cycles are, and then we're going to talk about, well, pretty much where and how we're going to actually use these life cycles. So life cycles have different stages. First one is the application life cycle. The second is the activity life cycle. And the third one is the fragment life cycle. So in this particular video, we're going to focus on the application life cycle because we are developing Android applications. So right here is an Android lifecycle algorithm. You can see every life cycle in this algorithm. So when we first open the Android application, the onCreate method works. And this is the first stage for an Android application. And you should remember that we write most of the code in this method. Application is created in the onCreate method using Java code. After the onCreate method, the onStart method works. Then after the onStart method, onResume is the method that works. So this means that when you open an application, these are the three methods that will work. The onResume method continues as long as the application is running. But sometimes Android apps can be a little finicky. They can be thrown into the background or forced to pause. How does that happen? Well, for example, when you work on an Android application or when you play an Android game, let's say a phone call or message comes in and your application or game is forced to pause, right? Now, because when a phone call comes in, the Android device needs to show you this call. The time the phone call comes in, your Android application is forced to pause. So when the application is paused, the onPause method starts to work. After the call, when you continue your game, onResume method starts to work again. So this time, just the onResume method works because the application is paused. But when you first open the application, three methods are employed. After the onPause method, the onResume method starts to work. So this is the part that the application continues from where it paused. The application pauses in the onPause method. Now, when you go out of an application, the onStop method works. And then after the onStop method, if you want to open the application again, the onRestart method works this time. Then after the onRestart method, onStart and onResume methods will work. So, when will the application pass to the onDestroy method? Well, that's after the application is closed. It passes to the onDestroy method. Then, after the onDestroy method, if you want to open the application again, respectively onCreate, onStart, and then the onResume method will work. Now, also there is another situation when you jump from one application to another application. The first application goes into the onPause and onStop method. And then after a while, if you do not go back to that first application, Android operating system will close the application itself. But before it does this, the Android operating system checks the device memory. Now, if all of the open applications force the operating system to work, it will close any unused applications itself. So now it brings us to the question, where are we going to use these life cycles? For example, you play an Android game, and when you play a game, a phone call comes in. And when a phone call comes in, your game application goes to the onPause method. Then after the phone call, you're going to need to continue where you left off, right? So to be able to continue where you left off, your scores, your stage, and all the other information needs to be saved. And we do these saving operations in the onPause method. So let's think about that for a second. After the pause method, your application goes to the stop method. Sometimes some codes need to work in the onStop method. So some applications should continue to run in the background. For example, let's say that you developed a GPS tracker app. Well, this application is doing location tracking using the device's GPS. When you put this application into the background, it should continue to track the location. So this application continues to run in the onStop method. Now also there's another thing. When your application runs in the background, device GPS will continue to work. And we all know what that does. It will drain the device battery pretty quickly. So if your application consumes the battery fast, people, they're not going to like that very much. They're going to complain. They're not going to use your application. So what can we do about this problem? Well, for an example, let's say that when the application goes to the onStop method, you can close the device GPS. So then after the application comes back to the onResume method, you can open the GPS again. That's how you reduce the battery usage. Okay, that's all well and good, but there are some applications that need to work even the onDestroy method. For example, a mail or a message application. So these types of applications need to check the server periodically. So now that you know what's going on with these explanations, you should really know what the application is doing in its particular life cycle. You should know these processes so you can control your application better. So let me give you another example. Let's say that you develop a mail application. So when the user is writing an email, a phone call comes in. And when the phone call comes in, your application passes to the onPause method. And then after the phone call, the user goes back to the mail app again. Now, if you don't save in the onPause method what the user wrote, well, the user's got to start all over again from the beginning. Who wants that? That's frustrating. So in other words, you need to consider all of these particular life cycles when you develop an Android app. So this was the theoretical part, okay? And that's only just a few of the variety of scenarios that you may encounter when developing your app. But right now, let's put the theory to the side and let's go to Android Studio and see it in practice. Now, you know that we have a couple of projects by now in Android Studio, so I want to show you these particular methods on this project. So here you can see the onCreate method. Now, we have worked most of the time in this method, but it's really not the only method. I want to show you some of the other methods. There's an easy way to call methods in Android Studio. When you write the first letters of the method, Android Studio shows you the methods that start with these letters. So I will call onDestroy method first, and then second, onPause method. Third, onStop method. After that, onStart. And onResume methods. Now, which method did we forget? The last one is onRestart method. Now, when we run our application, we need to track which of these methods are currently working. How the heck do you do that? Well, I'll teach. That's what I'm here for. I will teach you how to track application stages. When you develop an Android application, Android Studio keeps log records. So you can use these log records to track the application workflow. So here I will put a log record, and it will take two parameters. The first one is log name, and this shows me how I will track this log. The second one is message. So when I find this log, it will show me this message. And I'll write here log.d. Now D means debug. And I can see this log message in the debug logs. And I'll write a message for the tag, and it will show me the debug logs with the message title. And second is the message. And I'll write here onCreate. Whichever method works, I want the name of the method to be written. For the onCreate method, I want to be written onCreate. Now, in the same way, for the onDestroy method, it will write onDestroy. And then that way I can do the same for the rest. All right, so let's run the application and see which methods will work. Okay, so before we run it, I do need to show you where you see your log records. So there's a logcat section on the bottom of Android Studio. After you click the logcat, I will select debug records. Now, because I write the log.d, it will track debug logs. Let's say if I write log.i, it will track info logs. So I selected the debug records. All right, so now I can run the application. And what do you see here? So when the application was first opened, the onCreate, onStart, and onResume methods worked. So we showed you this on the algorithm. Let's continue so that when I put the application in the background, the onPause and the onStop methods work. So let me put my application on the background again. Now, because I want to pass to another application, I will go back to my application again. When I go back to my application again, on Restart, on Start, and on Resume methods worked. Okay, so good. Let's look at the algorithm. Okay, so you can see on the algorithm, after the onStop method, on Restart, on Start, and on Resume methods all work. So what if I closed my application using the back button? So after I click the back button, onPause, onStop, and onDestroy method worked. So what needs to be done at these stages? We will write into these methods. So we will write in onCreate method what we need to write in the onCreate method. When the application goes into the onPause method, and if we need to save some information, we will write codes in the onPause method. And when the application goes into the onStop method, if we want our application to do something in the background, we can just write these codes in the onStop method. So, for example, I'll continue on from the earlier example. If you want to close device GPS when the application is in the background, I will write these codes in the onStop method. Now, I didn't want to get too serious in the beginning, but I want to tell you that, and I'll emphasize again, this topic is important. I'm going to finish up this video here, but you will be able to continue to work on the device and see some of the other methods yourself. I do want to get started in the next video, but review this if you need to. In the next video, we're going to continue this topic on the activity lifecycle. So I'll see you then in the next video. Activity lifecycle. Hello everyone, just as promised, I want to talk to you about the activity lifecycle in this video. Now, at first glance, the activity lifecycle is very similar to the application lifecycle. This time, though, we will focus on the activity and not the application. So it's going to be a little different. How does the lifecycle work with activity? This lifecycle algorithm is also valid for the activity. Now, we have just explained how the lifecycle works in the previous video. I don't want to necessarily repeat all of that. I just want to show you in practice in Android Studio. So let's go to Android Studio. Of course, you remember we've got a project that's been cooking, and we'll continue with this project. Now, in the last video, we added some log records to see the methods working. And I'm going to add a couple of components on this project to see how the activity lifecycle works. And I will add to this main activity one text view and two buttons. So now I have three components. I'll organize them to just so that I can, see it comfortably. And I will change the layout height and width of this text view to 50 dp. For the layout height, 50 dp is too big, so I will change it to 30. Also, I will change text of the text view to 0. And also, I will change the text size of the text view to 24. And the text color of the text view can be white. And the background color of the text view can be green. And the gravity of the text view can be centered. Okay, so now I've done all of this to see the number on the text view comfortably. So now when I click on this button, I want to add to this number +1. So I will change the text of the button to +1. Also, I have another button. When I click this button, I want to go to another activity, so I need another activity. Now, how do I create another activity? I click on the app folder, and after that, I select File, New Activity, and Empty Activity. Now I need to give it a name. Well, let's call it just Second Activity, and click Finish. So now Android Studio will create a second activity for me. And here's the second activity. And here's the main activity. So when I click this button, I want to open the second activity. So I will change the text of this button, and I will go to the second activity. So now that that's done, I will write Java codes for these components. Now first I will define these components. So I will write text view, and button 1, and button 2. I will continue in the onCreate method. Text view equals find view by ID r.id.textView. Button 1 equals find view by ID r.id.button. Button 2 equals find view by ID r.id.button2. So now I will add a click listener to, button 1, and button 1 dot set on click listener, new view on click listener. And also I will add a counter here. So integer counter equals 0. And so every time that I click the number 1 button, I want the counter to increase. So I'll write counter equals counter plus 1. And also it should write this new counter to the text view. Okay, so TextView.setText, quotation marks plus counter. Now, if I add quotation marks before the counter, it will change the integer counter to the string. It's a quick and down and dirty quick, but it works. So now it will increase the counter every time I click this button and write it to the text view. Then after that, I will add another click listener to button number 2. So button 2.setOnClickListener, new view on click listener. And when I click this button, it should open the second activity for me. But how's it going to do that? I will use intent for this. That's a topic that I'm going to leave to explain a little bit later, but I just want you to write exactly what I write for now, and we'll talk about its details later. So intent, I equals new intent, and inside the parenthesis, get application context, second activity dot class. After that, start activity I. Now, when I click button 2, it will open the second activity for me. So when I go to the between two activities, I want to see which methods work, right? Because of this, I will write the first activity before the word onCreate. And this will show me the onCreate method works for the first activity. So I can copy this first activity word and paste it to all of the methods. Okay, so I'm done with the first activity. So when I click this +1 button, it will increase this number on the text view. Also, when I click this button, it will open the second activity. Okay, so now I can pass on to the second activity. And I'll add a button to the second activity. This button is for going back to the main activity. And I will just bring this button into the center. And let's change the text of the button. So I'll write, just go to the activity number 1. And when I click this button, it should open the first activity. So I need to define this button on the Java side. So I'll write here, button, and in the onCreate method, button equals find view by ID r.id button 3. And I'll add a click listener to this button, button.setOnClickListener, new view on click listener. And then after that, I will use the same intent codes for this button. Intent I equals new intent, get application context, main activity dot class, and start activity I. Also, I need log records for this activity to see which methods work. So I'll copy the log records from the main activity and then paste it into the second activity. Also, I will change the first activity and, well, instead of first activity, I'll just write in the second activity. And I can do the same for the rest. So that means that after that, the second activity is ready to go. So that means that when I click this button, it should open the main activity. And when I click this button, it will open the second activity. And if I click this button, it will increase the number +1. Okay, so before I run it, though, I want to open the log records And after that, I can run the application. All right, so the application's opening. And now you can see when the application was first opened, 3 methods worked. First activity on create, first activity on start, and first activity on resume. So if I click go to second activity, what's going to happen when I push this button? Okay, so when I clicked the second activity button, the first activity on pause method worked. And then after that, the second activity on create, on start, and on resume methods worked. And after the second activity opened, the first activity on stop method worked. Wow. Okay, so here's where you got to be careful. So I'm going to click go to activity 1. And when I click go to activity 1 button, the second activity on pause method worked. And then after that, the first activity on create, on start, and on resume methods worked. Okay, so that means the first activity created again. After the first activity opened, the second activity on stop method worked. All right, so do you get why this is so important here? I want to show you, because you remember, right, that I put a button here. So when I click this button, it will increase the counter +1 and then write it on the text view. So I'm going to click this button 6 times. And now it writes 6 in the text view. So after that, I'll click to go to the second activity, and it opened the second activity. Then after that, I'll go back to the main activity. And when I go back to the main activity, what does the counter say? Counter says 0. So when I go to the second activity, the main activity is closed. When it closed, boom, everything is gone. So when I go back to the main activity is created again. Because of this, it deleted everything. It's like we never even saw each other, never even fell in love at first sight, never even began. So what if I want to keep the counter value? I must save it before the activity is closed. That's right. So this also happens, by the way, when I rotate the phone. So let me click this button again, and the counter is 5. After that, I'll rotate the phone into the landscape position. So when I turn the phone, the first activity on pause, that worked, on stop, and on destroy, those methods worked. After that, on create, on start, and on resume methods worked for the first activity again. So that means that when I turn the phone, the activity is destroyed and created again. And when I turn the phone, also the counter is reset. So that means before I return the phone, I need to save the values too. You see how important it is to think ahead. We're going to learn how to save values in some of the later videos, but I just want to show you how important it is. I think that by now you certainly understand how the activity lifecycle works. And for me, and for you, and for, let me speak for all of us, it's enough for this video. We are going to talk about the fragment lifecycle, though, in the next video. Let's make a date. I'll see you in the next video. Fragment lifecycle. Hello, everyone. I promised you, and here we are. This is the video that we will talk about lifecycle in fragments. Now, no, it's not poetry. We're just going to discuss in detail fragments in these next couple of videos. Now, we're not going to go into details about fragments, but we will talk about life cycles within fragments. Okay, so I want to give you a little bit of information about fragments, though, just to, give you some context. Fragments are presented to the developer after API Level 11. Fragments are a user interface that works within the activity. We can define fragments as small activity particles. So fragments are more useful and more dynamic as a user interface. So because of these reasons, developers prefer to use fragments. For example, you can create fragments as many as you want, as much as you want, as deep as you want in one activity. Also, you can use one fragment in more than one activity. So I think this is enough information to give you some background on fragments. Just want to give you that so that we continue work on life cycles. So fragments, of course, would have their own life cycle. So it means that if a fragment has a life cycle from the moment it was created to the moment it was closed, and that's what we're going to focus on in this video. So when a fragment first starts, these three methods start to work: on attach, on create view. And then after they get going, these three methods start to work: on activity created, on start, and on resume. Now with the on resume method, fragment continues to work. When the fragment closes, these methods start to work: on pause, on stop, on destroy view, on destroy, and on detach. Now, there are also these milestones. If you start a fragment again after the onStop method, it will begin from the onStart method. If you start a fragment after the onDestroyView method again, it will begin from the onCreateView method. Now, after the onDetach method, the fragment is completely closed. And we spoke earlier about these algorithm milestones in the previous videos. So now I want to show you how these methods work in Android Studio. Now, of course, you know that we have some projects brewing over here in Android Studio, so we can continue on this project. And now I'm going to show you how to create a fragment. So first, I will need to create a layout for the fragment. I'm going to right-click this layout folder and select New Layout Resource File. And after that, I'll give a name to this layout file. Name could be Fragment New. And click OK. Okay, so now a layout is created, and I will add a text view to this layout. And I'll just change the background color of this layout. I will make this text view into the center. I'm also going to change the text of this text view. I'm going to write, "This is a new fragment." And also I'm going to change the text size and the text color of the text view. Okay, so now we can see this fragment comfortably. So after that, I need to create a class for this fragment. I'll right-click on the main activity class and select New Java class. Now I just need to give this class a name. Name can be fragment example, and click OK. Now that that's done, this class will need to extend fragment class. And then after this, I'll need to add a method in the class. So this method is onCreateView method. When I select this method, Android Studio will take care of the rest. And now that that's done, I'll need to change this return part. So this method will inflate our fragment. And I'll write here return inflator.inflate. And this inflate method will take on 3 parameters. The first one is fragment layout name, and I'll just write that here. r.layout. And I'll write here the layout name. Name is fragment new. Second parameter is container, and this is a constant. And the third one is false. Now the fragment class is ready. And now I need to just add this fragment to the main activity. So all I need to do is drag a fragment from the components and drop it in here. And then a window opens, and I'll select the fragment example class and click OK. And now the fragment is added to the main activity. And I will change the sizes of this fragment. It can be 200 dp. Okay, so now the fragment's ready. Let's run it and make sure. So here you can see the fragment is ready. Of course, this is the simplest fragment in the simplest form, but it's just for an example. We're not going to use it like it is, but just put a fragment in the activity and leave it like this for now. Fragments aren't typically used like this. I just wanted to show you how to create a simple fragment because in this video, just want you to see the fragment lifecycle, not necessarily how to use fragments in the project. Got me? All right. So after that, what do? We can see which methods will work in the fragment lifecycle. Now, where will I write the lifecycle methods? That's right, in the fragment class. So I added one more method here. It is the onAttach method, and we can add other methods together. So let me look at it here to check which methods I'll need to add. So I'll add the onCreate method, onActivityCreated method, the onStop method, onStart method, onResume method. I'll add an onPause method, onDestroyView method, onDestroy method, and the last one is onDetach method. So I added all of the methods in the fragment lifecycle. So now that that's done, I will need to add log records for these particular methods because I'm going to want to see which method works when, where, and how. Well, no, I already know how. So I'm going to add inside this method log.i. This time I'm not going to use the debug log record because I used it in the main activity. I don't want to confuse myself. So log.i gets 2 parameters. First one is title, and I'll write fragment for the title. Second one is message. So which method works? I want to write the name of that method in the message. So for the onCreateView method, I will write in the message onCreateView. And I'll copy this log record line and paste it into every method. Okay, so now I will change messages. For the onAttach method, I will write onAttach. For the onCreate method, onCreate. And it'll be the same for the rest. Great, so now I can track records here. I'm not going to select debug anymore. I will select info because letter I is an abbreviation for info. I'm going to write fragment. All right, so now I'm going to run the application. And what do we see here when the application first opened? onAttach, onCreate, onCreate view, onActivity created, onStart, and onResume methods are all working. They all worked. They did their thing. Until this fragment is created, these 6 methods worked. Now, if I close the application, onPause, onStop, onDestroy view, onDestroy, and onDetach methods will work. If I open the application again, these methods will work again. That does not mean, though, that other methods will not work in the main activity. They also continue to work. So when we open the application, first, the main activity is created. Then, after that, fragment is created. And we can see the main activity log records from here. So let me just select debug. And I'm just going to delete fragment in the search area and write the message here. So when I close the application, you can see the activity lifecycle methods in here. And when I run the application, both the activity lifecycle methods worked and the fragment lifecycle methods worked as well. So that's pretty cool. You can see how these methods work in detail yourself. It's just up to you to play around a little bit. Of course, you can change these log records and see all of the methods together. That's up to you. That's why they call it a preference. But for now, I think it's enough for this video. I'm sure, I'm quite confident actually, that you understand the life cycle, especially as they relate to fragments. So until the next video, take care, learn well, and I will see you next time. Services. Hello, everyone. In this video, we're going to talk about Android services. So services are one of the basic features in Android. So when you develop an Android application, services play an important role. So because of this, you should learn services back and front and forward. Well, you got to know them real well anyway. We're going to talk about services in pretty good detail in this upcoming video. So a service, as I said, is an Android application component that can perform long-running operations in the background. Service is also an Android component like the other Android components, but it works in the background. So another feature of the services of Android is that there is no user interface. So services don't need a user interface because services don't actually interact with users, right? So normally other Android components are in constant interaction with users, you know, mail inputs and password inputs and clicking buttons and all that good stuff. But services don't need that. A service can be started by other Android components. So for example, when you click a button in an Android application, a service can be started in the background by this button, right? So let's say in a real-world example, I can give a file download example as a real-world example. In an application, when you click a download button, a service starts to download the file in the background. Now, sometimes this file can be a huge file size, and it can take a while to download this file. A service takes this download task and does it in the background. Meanwhile, you can go on working within your application, right? So, in this download example, first, the download works in the background. Second, this download service does not have a user interface. It can show the user a download bar or a notification, but these are not in the activity or in the application. Third, the service started with a download button, which means that the service component started with another button component. Now we can give another service example. So a music player application can be an example for some services. A music player can continue to play selected music in the background. And another example could be something like an application can download a photo from the internet in the background. Or an application can send information to the server in the background. Of course, you can give millions of examples of services. There are many extensive uses of services in Android applications. But there are 3 different types of services in Android applications. So the first one, I think you probably know, is foreground services. So in foreground services, the user can see the process. For example, your application will download a file in the background. This is a foreground service. In the foreground service, the user needs to see notifications. Also, the user needs to see the download process, or when the download finishes, there should be some information that's given to the user. Also, even though the user does not interact with the application, the service has to continue to work in the background. For example, your application starts to download a file in the background. This file could be a huge size, let's say a gigabyte, and while the download process continues, the user can continue to work within the application. Even if the user leaves the application, the download process must continue. So the second one is background services. So in the background services, the user does not see the process. The application does not show the notifications to the user. Now, sometimes the user doesn't even know anything about the service process or what's going on. It does everything in the background. Let me think of an example. So you develop an application. This application stores some photos in the device memory. And while the application is storing photos on the device, it can compress the photos in the background. Now, the user doesn't have to know about this compression process. But what the application does in the background, or how the application compresses photos in the background, is circumstantial. The user doesn't know anything about the processes. What the user does, the user just takes the photos and saves them to the device. And while you store these photos in the background, you can create a compression service in the background so that the photos take up less space in the memory to make the application work better on the phone. The user's going to be very happy about that. So in other words, you can compress photos in the background, and when you need these photos, you can uncompress them again. So in these examples, this service, you're doing some operations in the background and without the user's knowledge. Also, the user doesn't interact with this service. Now, the third one is bound services. We talked a little bit, maybe you remember that I mentioned it before, but this is the service that is dependent on the component that calls itself. So service interacts with the component permanently that calls itself. So when the component that calls itself stops, the service also stops. The service does not continue to work in the background. And in the literature, this relationship is called client-server relation. So in this relationship, the server is in service and the client is the component that starts the service. A music player application could be an example for bound services, because when you start a music player application, the service sends data to the player periodically. This data could be which music could be playing, or which is the name of the next song, or which minute of music is playing, and this kind of thing. When the user closes the application, the music will stop. Now, when you start the application again, music will also be able to start to play again. So you see that the service is in continuous interaction with a component. And that's why we call this kind of service bound service. Now, when you come up to the service writing part, there are two service classes. The first one is the standard service class. So what is the standard service class? This is a traditional service class. The service class takes on the whole task on its own. But this service class has a feature that uses the main thread of the application. So I'm thinking that I'll give you a few details for this part. So Android operating system gives each application a share of the processor. So that means that your application uses this share of the processor. Also, your service will use the same share of the processor. That makes sense, right? But if the service uses most of this share, your application will slow down. So because of this, if your service has a big task, you should not use this standard service class because it will slow down your application. But if your service task is small, you can go ahead and use standard service class. So for an example, your application will download a movie from the internet, and at the same time, you want to be able to use your application. So the download process will take some time and will use resources of the application. And then when you use the application at the same time, it works slowly. Users do not want a slow application. So how do you solve this problem? So this is where another service class type helps us. It's called intent service class. So the intent service class is a subclass of the service class. The intent service class does not use the application's main thread. It creates an other work thread and uses its own thread. So that means the intent class requests an other share of the processor from Android operating system. This doesn't slow down the application, and the intent service class is used in long-term background processes. So, of course, now that you understand everything there is to know about service, we can shuffle on over to Android Studio. Now, because I don't want to just, give you theoretical information that, might be okay, and you can tell your friends all about it at your next party, but I need to show you this in practice so that you get practice so that you can develop some great Android apps. So, have you got Android Studio open? We have a project in Android Studio, and let's continue with it. Before we start, though, I do want to show you what the finished version looks like in this example. So we've got two buttons in this example, and if we click on the Start Service button, it of course will start the service. Now, if we click the Stop Service button, it will stop the service. Sounds magical, right? But I do want to track these steps from the log records. So when the service starts, the log records will show us that the service is started, and when the service stops, the log records will also show us that the service has stopped. All right, so now we can start designing the project. And I will add two buttons here. I will change the layout width of the buttons to 200 dp. And we'll give some distance between the buttons. And I'll give an ID to these buttons. And now that that's done, I will define these buttons in the main activity. I'll just write in here button, button start, and button, button stop. Now in the onCreate method, button start equals find view by ID r.id.button start, and button stop equals find view by ID r.id.button stop. Okay, so once that's done, I will add click listeners to these buttons. Now you know how I will add a click listener. You are very well practiced in that by now, so that's all standard. So now that that's done, we need a service class to run services. So I'm going to create a service class from here. First, I'm going to right-click the main activity Java class and select New Java class. And I will need to give a name to this class. Name is Services Example. All right, so Android Studio created a Service Example class. And the Service Example class needs to extend service class. So I'll just write here, extend service. Now, you know we mentioned two service classes, right? Standard service class and intent service class. So first, we will extend standard service class. And when I extend service class, Android Studio wants to add methods. So let me just have a look and select from here, implement methods. And it will add this method. Now you see that Android Studio added onBind method. You remember that we mentioned the bound service before? We're not going to create a bound service. Because of this, we're not going to use that, but it does have to stay here. So I'm going to add other methods. First, the onCreate method. Second, onStartCommand method. And then the onDestroy method. And now we'll write service codes in these methods. And we will write the onCreate method, operations that should be done when the service is first created. And we will write in the onStartCommand method the operations that should be done when that service is started. And we will write in the onDestroy method the operations that should be done when that service is stopped. So what you want the service to do, you will write in each of these sections. For example, if you want to download a picture from the internet, you will write these codes in this class. So we're not going to write a service in this video for now. I just, want to check whether the system is working or not. So let's check that when I create a service, I need to see whether this onCreate method is working or not. Now, to see if these methods work, I will need to add log records into these methods. First, I will add in the onCreate method. And of course, you remember from the previous videos how we will add log records, right? The log records have two parameters. The first one is title, and I will write service for the title. And the second one is message. And what will I write for the message? Service is created. And I'll write the same code in the onStart command method. I'll just change the message. I will write service is started. And in the onDestroy method, I will write service is stopped. So how do I run this service? So we have a service class. We also have a main activity class. Hopefully you remember that when we explained services, we also said that a component should start the service. So in this example, our component is button. Now, while we're on the subject of buttons, let's go ahead and change the text of the buttons. And what will I write for the first button? Start service. And what about for the second button? Stop service. Okay, so if you want, you can write something here, start download instead of start service. The time that it will start the download process, or I don't know, something, but of course you will need to write the download process codes in the service class. So now when we click the Start Service button, the service will start in the click listener. And then after that, the service class will start to run operations. Now we do need one more thing at this point. We'll need to define the service class in the manifest file. So let's open up the manifest file. And in here, under Activity, XML code, I will write service XML code. And in this part, I just need to write service class name. You remember what the name of the service class name is? Service example. All right. Now after that, we just need to write code to run the service. So what I'll do is I'll write these codes in the onClick method, and I will start this service using the intent method. So I just write that in here, intent, I equals new intent, and the intent method has two parameters. And the first one is get application context. The second one is service example.class. On the second line, I will write start service I. And this start service command will start the service. So I promised you, and I will, explain this intent topic in the next video. But now that we've done all that, I will open the log records, and in the log records, I will select debug records, and in the search area, I will write service. Okay, so now I can run the application. And the application's working. So when I click the Start Service button, in the log records, the service is created, the service is started. So first, service is created. After that, the service is started. Okay, so now the service is running. After the service started, if I click Start Service button again, you can see here that this time it just writes service is started. Because when you first created the service, after that, it won't create again until you stop the service, right? So it will just start again, created service. Now also, I need to mention to you that if I write here the stop self method, it will stop the service automatically after the service finishes the task. So for example, if your service task is to download a file from the internet, the service will stop automatically after it finishes downloading. So let's run it again and see how this method works. So you can see here that when I click the Start Service button in the log records, the service is created, service is started, and service is stopped. And I've not stopped the service yet, but it stopped automatically. That is the stop self method. And if I wanted to stop the service manually, I will write my code in the Stop Service button. I'll write it here, the same intent method, and on the second line, I will write Stop Service I. So now when I click the Stop Service button, the Stop Service method will work. And in the service class, onDestroy method will also work. In the onDestroy method, this log record will work. So let's run it again. And the application is working. So first I will start the service, but I need to delete the stop self method. Now, when I click the Start Service button, it writes service is created and service is started. When I click the Stop Service button, it writes service is stopped. So this example is classic service class. Also, you should remember that there is another service class. It's the intent service. Classic service class uses the main thread. Intent service class creates its own thread. And I think we'll leave it there. So this time I will extend the intent service class. So when I write here extends intent service, I can delete this onBind method, and the other methods will stay. So I'm going to click here and select Implement Methods. It will add onHandle intent method. Now also, I will need to create a constructor for this class. I'll click here and select Create Constructor, and I create a constructor with argument. So I'll delete the argument, and I'll just write it here, return name. Now the intent service is ready. And I'll delete this part, it's not necessary. I can see methods in these log records. And I'll just add a log record in this onHandle intent method. Okay, so everything's ready. And yeah, we're ready to run the application again. So when I click the Start Service button in the log records, service is created, service is started, onHandle intent method worked, and the service is stopped. And look at that. I did not even write Stop Self method. It stopped the service itself because the intent service handles everything itself. When it finishes the task, it stops the service itself. So that's about it for services in Android applications. I really do hope that was useful for you. And you can take it and run it and mash it up and create some wonderful services and applications of your own. I'll see you next time.